Hi, I'm Yetta. It was supposed to be my birthday. My name was on the invitation. The cake was mine. I even paid for the paper plates. But that night, my sister announced she got a job in New York. And just like that, my party wasn't mine anymore. They applauded her while I cleaned frosting off the floor. The next morning, my mom found something I left on the kitchen table. She screamed, but it wasn't the sound that stayed with me. It was the silence that came after, when nobody asked why. What would make a daughter take her whole family to court, right before giving birth? And why didn't I stop it? Because by then, they'd already erased me. Wouldn't you want to know how? I spent 2 weeks planning the whole thing, from the paper lanterns I strung up in the backyard to the delicate frosting on the carrot cake I ordered. Everything had my fingerprints on it. I didn't hire a party planner. I didn't ask for help, mostly because I knew no one would offer. And even if they did, they'd turn it into something else. Something not mine. It was supposed to be simple. A late afternoon gathering with soft acoustic music, light drinks, and polite conversation. My kind of celebration. Nothing flashy, nothing loud. Just family, a few friends, and maybe a chance, just one, to feel seen. The guests arrived in waves. They kissed Vera on the cheek like it was her housewarming. She beamed, hands waving toward the garden as if she had hung the lights herself. I said nothing, smiled. I smiled so much my cheeks hurt. People asked where the bathroom was, complimented the playlist, asked who catered the sandwiches. I answered each question kindly because I was raised that way. Then came the moment I'd been dreading since I clicked order on that cake. My cousin set it down on the main table. It looked exactly like the photo. 3 tiers, pale pink roses, piped edges. But when I leaned in to read the message, it hit me. So proud of you! No name, no mention of a birthday, no age, no happy birthday Yetta. Just vague congratulations, like someone hedged their bets. Even the cake wasn't sure who it was celebrating. I tried to shrug it off. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe someone thought it was safer to go generic. Maybe, though I knew better, it wasn't personal. A guest wandered by, glass of rosé in hand. "Is this her birthday?" she asked another woman beside her. "I think it's for both sisters or something," the woman whispered back. I didn't correct them. I just watched them walk off toward the drinks table. Then it happened. Mom tapped her wine glass with a fork. The chatter faded. Everyone turned. I was midway through unwrapping a serving spoon when she smiled and said, "We just want to take a second to share something special before we cut the cake." I froze. Beside her, Callista was already beaming. She held up a sleek envelope, the kind you'd expect for a wedding invitation or a scholarship announcement. I knew that envelope. I'd seen it when I applied to grad school 12 years ago. Only difference? Mine was thinner. "I got it," Callista said, voice trembling with delight. "New York, full offer, editorial track." The backyard erupted, clapping, squeals. A few people even stood to hug her. Vera reached out to grasp Callista's hand with watery eyes. My aunt said, "We should have made this a going-away party." Laughter followed. Someone popped open a second bottle of Prosecco. No one looked at me. The cake I'd paid for stood in front of me, untouched. The roses seemed to sag under the weight of their ambiguity. I picked up a napkin and carefully wiped a line of frosting that had slipped down the side. I wanted to speak, not shout, not accuse, just correct the record. But what would I say? Actually, this was my birthday? That would sound petty. Ungrateful, like I was trying to steal thunder from my sister's moment. So I said nothing. I kept smiling. I made sure the kids didn't knock over the drink dispenser. I reminded someone where the extra napkins were. I threw out a stack of used paper plates. Later, inside, the kitchen was quiet. I opened the fridge and stared at the second cake box I had hidden in the back, just in case. It had my name on it, piped in mint green frosting. I imagined cutting it alone, eating it in silence. Instead, I poured myself tea, same mug, same motion, but it tasted like nothing. I carried the tea outside, steadying the mug with both hands even though it wasn't full. The sun had dipped behind the neighbor's roofline, and fairy lights strung across the pergola cast a soft, bouncing glow over the crowd. The music had shifted, something louder now, with bass that pulsed through the wooden deck. They were still celebrating. I moved slowly, weaving through clusters of guests, past a group gathered near the drinks table. Laughter spilled out in waves. I smiled when people made eye contact, nodded when they complimented the lanterns, the food, the ambiance. No one mentioned the cake. No one asked if I had made a wish. I paused when I saw the gift table, or what was left of it. It had been pushed against the fence. My carefully arranged display, now crammed between a folding cooler and a stack of Solo cups. The wrapping paper I had chosen to match the table runner, ivory with sage leaves, looked out of place next to red party buckets and half-empty chip bowls. A kid, maybe 6 or 7, tugged at one of the gifts, unwrapping it halfway before his mother caught him. "Oh, honey, that's not a party favor," she said, pulling the box from his hands. The boy pointed. "But it was next to the soda." His mother glanced at me, blinked. "Oh, I thought these were Callista's?" I said nothing, just gently took the gift and rewrapped it as best I could, pressing the paper crease with my thumb. She didn't apologize. I turned to walk back toward the kitchen when I heard it. Vera's voice, sharp and cheery. "Yetta, could you give me a hand in here?" I walked inside. She was rinsing a glass, Callista sitting on a bar stool nearby, scrolling her phone. "Callista's exhausted," Vera said, not looking at me. "Too much excitement. Could you start clearing the deck? Maybe wipe the tables down? There's sticky stuff everywhere." Callista didn't even glance up, just murmured, "Thanks, Yed." That was the part that did it. Not the cleaning, not the being told, not asked, but the assumption, like I was the hired help, expected and invisible. The whole house had that rhythm, where I was only noticed when something needed to be done. I didn't speak. I stepped outside, grabbed a roll of paper towels and the all-purpose spray from under the sink, and went back out to the deck. People were still lingering, standing around, chatting, dancing to whatever playlist Callista had switched to. I slipped between them, wiping down the picnic tables. A few nodded at me like I was part of the wait staff. Someone moved their drink to the side without making eye contact. Another leaned across and said, "You mind grabbing a trash bag? This stuff's starting to pile up." I did as they asked. The table nearest the fire pit had a spill. Orange soda, maybe. It had run down the leg and pooled near the steps. I knelt to clean it, the hem of my dress dragging into the wet patch. Nobody paused. Nobody offered a towel. They stepped over me, around me. One nearly tripped, muttered, "Whoops!" and kept walking. I stayed there, hands sticky, knees damp, scrubbing until the wood stopped reflecting the string lights. I didn't know why I was doing it anymore. Maybe this is my role, I thought. Set the stage, sweep it after, let others shine. But even as I thought it, something cracked. A voice deep inside that whispered, "What if it didn't have to be?" I stood slowly, pressing my hands against my thighs to wipe the moisture off. My palms left faint imprints on the fabric. Across the yard, Callista was laughing. She had changed into something looser, more comfortable, wine in hand, surrounded by a ring of admirers. She didn't look at me once. As I turned to head back inside, a woman called out, "Is it okay if we move this table? We need more room for the drinks." I nodded. Of course. I always nod. I stepped into the kitchen and grabbed a handful of napkins to clean my hands. The paper tore against the tacky syrup, so I reached for a dish rag instead. As I wiped, I heard a rustle behind me. A teenager tossed a half-wrapped box into the black trash bag leaning against the counter. He didn't hesitate, didn't glance at the tag. It was mine. He moved on. I didn't stop him, I just watched. But something inside me stirred. Not rage, not sadness. Resolve. The next morning, the house felt like a ghost of the chaos it held the night before. No music, No laughter echoing from the backyard. Just the soft hum of the fridge and the creak of floorboards that needed fixing a decade ago. I padded barefoot into the kitchen, wrapped my fingers around a mug, and waited as the kettle hissed to life. The sunlight pushed through the curtains in long stripes, dust dancing in the beams like it had all the time in the world. I didn't. With coffee in hand, I sank into the bench by the window. The same window where Mom kept her succulents. Tiny green things she watered with more devotion than she ever gave me. I opened my phone and tapped into social media. Notifications rolled in like waves. Photos tagged, reels shared, stories reposted. I clicked one out of habit. My thumb hovered over the screen. Callista was center stage in every shot, beaming, toasting, hugging Vera. Even when the background changed, from the deck to the fire pit, she remained the nucleus. And me? I wasn't in any of them. Except one. Just my arm, cropped in at the edge, holding a tray of drinks. One of the captions read, "Grateful for this beautiful send-off." Another had the nerve to say, "Callista's always been the heart of this family." I didn't even flinch. I'd stopped expecting fairness a long time ago. A comment caught my eye. Was this her graduation party or something? Someone else replied, "No, just a spontaneous celebration. She deserves it all." Deserves it all. I'd paid for the cake, the lanterns, the napkins, even the biodegradable forks Vera insisted on because image matters. A throat cleared behind me. I didn't look up. Vera stepped into view, robe cinched, holding her own cup like she'd been awake longer than me. She glanced at my screen. "Oh, that was such a nice picture of you two by the lights." "We weren't both in it," I said. She waved her hand. "Well, you know what I mean." I didn't respond. She sipped, then sat across from me, as if this was just another Sunday chat. "Remember when Callista used to give you her dolls because you didn't have any? Always so generous, even as a little girl." I stared at her. "That's not what happened. I gave her mine. The big one. You told me to share because she cried." Vera blinked like I'd spoken a foreign language. "Well, memories blur, Yetta. Let's not dig into the past." Memories don't blur. They get rewritten by the people who shout loudest. I set my mug down and stood. Walked down the hallway lined with photo frames. The family wall. Moments frozen in glass. There was Callista in her cap and gown. Callista at Disney. Callista holding a trophy for something I couldn't remember. I scanned the images until I found one I knew had been mine, my 10th birthday. I remembered the dress, the balloons, the dog that ran across the yard mid-candle wish. Only the frame said, "Callista's 10th." My fingers traced the edge of the glass, then dropped to my side. "You always kept to yourself," Vera called from the kitchen. "We just assumed you didn't want attention." They assumed it, so they stopped offering it. Back in the kitchen, I opened the drawer where we kept random batteries and expired coupons. Buried beneath it all was a photo, faded, folded at the corners. I pulled it out. It was my 8th birthday. I knew because of the lopsided cake I made with Dad before he left. I remembered the icing smeared across my face, the mismatched candles we had to light 3 times because of the wind. But in this picture, I wasn't at the front. Callista was, holding the knife, wearing my crown. I flipped it over. In Vera's handwriting, it read, "Callista's big day, again." I sat with that photo a little longer than I meant to. My fingers smoothed its creased edge, but no amount of pressing could undo what had already been imprinted on the back. Callista's big day, again. I slipped the photo into the side drawer of my nightstand, pushed it closed, and stood. The air in the house had shifted. More voices now, the clink of silverware, smells of leftover chicken salad, and lukewarm coffee filtering from the kitchen. The party was gone, but its echo lingered. I passed the living room without looking at the wall of framed smiles. Vera and my aunt stood near the sink, heads leaned close like middle schoolers whispering behind lockers. I slowed without meaning to. "She's always been sensitive," my aunt murmured, voice low, but not low enough. Callista, though, she's got grit, knows how to take the spotlight. Vera made that soft chuckle she does when she agrees, but doesn't want to say it outright. She hummed, like it confirmed something long understood. Neither of them noticed me standing there. I stepped back quietly and turned toward the garage, telling myself I was looking for the folding tablecloths. Anything to get me out of earshot. The garage was cool and dim, smelling faintly of dust and old mulch. I moved a bin to get to the shelf where we stored holiday decorations. That's when I saw it. A small box wrapped in navy blue paper with silver ribbon, wedged behind a stack of unused Halloween lights. A tag was taped to the side. In my best friend's handwriting, "Happy birthday, Yetta! You matter!" I blinked, stared at it like it had grown legs. It wasn't on the gift table yesterday. It wasn't even near the party. Vera must have shoved it in here, out of sight, where it wouldn't clutter the aesthetic she'd curated. I held the box like it might break and stood still for a full minute, trying to figure out what to feel first. It wasn't anger. It was exhaustion dressed in new clothes. I carried it upstairs, didn't unwrap it, just placed it gently on my nightstand next to the photo drawer, and sat on the edge of my bed. Keep things low-key so no one feels awkward, Vera used to say about my birthdays. And I used to believe her. But low-key always meant quieter, smaller, easier to ignore. It meant one balloon instead of 5, a text instead of a call, an excuse instead of presence. Low-key wasn't for my comfort. It was for their convenience. They never say, "Don't celebrate me," I whispered to no one. They just move the celebration somewhere I can't reach. I walked back down the stairs. Vera was alone now, folding a dish towel at the sink. She looked up as I entered, like she hadn't seen me all morning. "You hungry? There's a few chicken sliders left," she offered, casual. "I found the gift in the garage," I said evenly. She paused, blinked. "What gift?" "From Ellie, the one with the silver ribbon." Her mouth opened, then closed. "Oh, right. I just thought it didn't match the rest of the setup. You know how clutter ruins photos." "Photos where I'm not even in them," I replied. Her face flushed. "I didn't mean anything by it." "That's always the excuse, isn't it?" I kept my tone calm. "Meaning well, but somehow I'm always the one erased." She didn't answer. I didn't wait for one. Upstairs again, I stared at the blue-wrapped box. I didn't touch it, didn't shake it, or wonder what was inside. That wasn't the point. It wasn't the gift. It was the fact that someone thought I was worth giving one to, and someone else decided it wasn't worth being seen. I left it on the table beside my bed, unopened, but no longer invisible. Monday started with the familiar whir of my ceiling fan and the smell of overbrewed coffee. I had woken up before my alarm, not because I was eager to get to work, but because sleep had stopped offering rest. I padded into my home office, the one place no one else touched. It wasn't fancy, just a desk, a secondhand chair I'd refinished myself, and a bulletin board cluttered with receipts, sketches, and a few photos that hadn't been edited to erase me. I flipped open my laptop, ready to drown myself in spreadsheets and logistics. But there it was, red bubble blinking in Slack. I clicked. "Morning, Yetta. We got a weird email over the weekend. Thought you should see it." Attached was a screenshot. The sender was anonymous, the kind that hides behind pseudonyms, and a Gmail address created 3 hours before sending. But the tone, that I recognized. Yetta has a tendency to react emotionally under pressure, may lack the temperament to lead during scale-up phases. A direct quote, not just in spirit, word for word, from something Vera had once said at a family brunch. Back then, it was when I dared to suggest I might expand my business. She had sipped her mimosa and said, "Are you sure you're ready? Pressure brings out the worst in some people." I stared at the email, my hand frozen on the mouse. Then, without a word, I screenshot it. Saved it in a folder already waiting, labeled Receipts. That wasn't a metaphor, that was the real name, and the folder was filling up fast. I didn't forward it to my partner, not yet. I didn't say anything out loud. Silence, I'd learned, made people nervous in ways shouting never could. Instead, I took a breath and started organizing the rest of my inbox, moving financial documents into one folder, invoices into another. My coffee cooled beside me. Then came the text. It buzzed against the desk, screen lighting up with a message from Vera. Long, too long for a check-in. I clicked. Callista's already dealing with a lot right now. I know things got a bit messy, but I don't think dragging legal stuff into it helps anyone. Family is more important than paperwork. We're stronger when we support each other, not when we threaten each other. I stared at it, reread it 3 times. It wasn't a plea. It was a warning dressed in a hug. I typed only 5 words in reply. I agree, family should be. Then I set my phone down and opened my legal tab. They thought I'd explode, that I'd call or text back in rage, maybe even cry. They were always waiting for that, some emotional storm they could point to and say, "See? She's unstable." But I'd learned something growing up in that house. If you want to terrify people who manipulate emotion, stay calm. So I did. I downloaded the revised contract from the county site, the one I was mysteriously removed from. I saved a copy next to the folder of screenshots and deed photos. Then I went to my calendar and booked a consultation with my lawyer for 9:30 the next morning. Just a 30-minute slot. Just enough to start the shift. Not a fight. A correction. Before I logged off, I clicked back into the folder and right-clicked Receipts. Rename. I typed Inheritance of Silence. Active. Because for years, I thought keeping peace meant keeping quiet. Now I understood. Silence isn't submission, it's strategy. The following morning arrived with a cold draft sliding beneath the dining room door. I moved through the house like someone preparing for a storm. Quiet, precise, already soaked on the inside. No one else was awake. Vera and Callista had stayed up late in the living room the night before, laughing too loudly over a second bottle of wine, while some show played on mute behind them. I stepped into the small office near the garage, the one Vera called her paper hub. It was more like a junk drawer in room form. Tax folders, warranties for appliances we no longer owned, dog-eared instruction manuals. I was looking for a copy of last year's tax return. Instead, I found something else. A thick envelope, slightly creased, tucked under a stack of Homeowners Association newsletters. I pulled it free. The notary seal caught the morning light like a slap. It was the updated deed. And my name wasn't on it. Just Vera and Callista. I stared at the document, blinking once, twice, willing my brain to misread what was clearly there. Then I remembered. I had signed the original mortgage with them 6 years ago. My credit was stronger, my business more stable. They couldn't get the loan without me. I paid more than half the down payment. But now? I was a ghost in ink. My hand trembled, but not from fear. From understanding. From the kind of clarity that no longer needs emotion to validate it. They needed my credit, I whispered. Now they don't even need my name. I took the envelope upstairs, laid it gently next to the copy of the original I'd kept tucked in my own drawer for years. The one that still said Yetta Mae Collins, co-owner, signed, dated, and filed. That night, as the TV glowed blue and Vera and Callista passed a cheese plate back and forth, I moved through the kitchen with practiced ease. They didn't notice me, and I didn't need them to. I placed the original deed, printed clean, crisp, next to the toaster. Then I added a sticky note. This is what I signed. This is what I still have. I didn't need a scene. I needed a signal. The next morning, the scent of Earl Grey reached the hallway before I heard her gasp. I entered just in time to see Vera frozen mid-pour, kettle in one hand, the paper in the other. "What is this?" she snapped, voice already rising. "Why would you bring this up now?" I stayed by the doorway, calm. "Because you thought I forgot," I said. "I didn't. I documented." Her eyes darted from me to the page, to the sticky note, then back. "Don't weaponize old paperwork, Yetta." "Then stop acting like history doesn't count when you rewrite it." She opened her mouth again, but before the words landed, Callista entered the kitchen, still in her robe, phone in hand. She took one look at the paper. Her face didn't move, but her eyes hardened. "You've been waiting to do this." I met her gaze. "No," I said. "I wasn't waiting. I was preparing." Callista didn't say another word. She stared at me for a beat too long, then turned away, her robe swinging like a curtain drawn shut. Vera followed after her without a sound, leaving the kitchen heavy with everything unsaid. By evening, the tension in the house had vanished, at least on the surface. Vera was back in her role: hostess, matriarch, the smiling woman who arranged brie slices just so on a ceramic platter. She had invited a few neighbors over, plus two of Callista's old college friends who were passing through town. It was supposed to be a send-off dinner. Something intimate and joyful, her words. I stayed in my room until the voices grew loud enough to fill the house. Then I came down, dressed in the same soft gray sweater I wore when I didn't want to be looked at too closely. No one noticed me slip in. Or if they did, they didn't say anything. The projector was already set up in the living room. A makeshift screen hung against the bookcase, with folding chairs pulled into semi-neat rows. Callista stood near the front, laughing with a hand on her hip. Her hair was curled, her smile wide. Then she dimmed the lights and hit play. The montage began with a baby photo, her, not me. Then preschool, piano recitals, debate club, graduation. A few clips were familiar, pulled from old family tapes. In one, I could be seen off to the side, blurred, passing a cup to a cousin. In another, I was adjusting a camera angle before disappearing entirely from the shot. Uplifting music swelled. On the screen, the caption read, "This family built me, especially Mom." The room erupted in applause. Vera sniffled beside the screen, dabbing her eyes with a napkin. "My baby," she whispered. I didn't move. I didn't clap. Someone leaned over and whispered, "You must be so proud." I offered a closed-lip smile, the kind I'd practiced in mirrors and staff meetings, the kind that meant, "Please leave me out of this." After the video, Callista raised a glass. "I wouldn't be where I am without this house, this family, everything I've become. It's because of you all." Another wave of clapping. Someone let out a whoop. She added, "And to my sister, Yetta's always been steady, quiet strength. We don't say it enough, but we notice." Everyone turned to look at me. I stayed seated near the kitchen archway, back straight. "Yetta," one of the neighbors said, "do you want to say anything?" I looked at the people in that room, some who'd called me Callista by mistake, others who hadn't spoken to me since the cake went untouched at my own birthday. "No," I said, voice clear. "Nothing that hasn't already been said. Clearly." A few chuckled, not sure if it was a joke. I stood, nodded once at no one in particular, and walked out before dessert. Not in anger, in clarity. Upstairs, I opened my laptop and logged into my private drive, the one I kept for contracts, documentation, the things that mattered when words failed. I created a new folder, dragging in the scans. The deed, the email from the anonymous concerned party, the note Vera had once handwritten to a notary. I hovered over the folder name, then renamed it, Evidence Now. Let them have their claps and toasts. I had the truth. By Thursday evening, the table was set like nothing had happened. Vera had gone all out. Her vintage lace runner stretched across the wood, crystal glasses lined up as if the queen herself might swing by. Callista had chosen the playlist, of course, something light, jazzy, smug. I recognized a few tracks from her high school graduation dinner. That one was also supposed to be a shared event, and somehow I ended up doing dishes while she got flowers. I didn't dress up. I wore black. Not for mourning, just for armor. Vera greeted me at the door with a smile that didn't quite meet her eyes. "Let's just clear the air tonight, okay?" she said. I nodded once and stepped inside. The guests were familiar, but not welcome. No one from my side. Just Vera, Callista, and the cousins who never made eye contact unless there was gossip to collect. I took my seat, deliberately choosing the chair farthest from the head. Dinner began with salad and surface-level talk. Vera asked about Callista's packing schedule. Callista giggled about trying to fit her shoe collection into 2 suitcases. I let it play out. Fork, knife, chew, nod. Then Vera pivoted. "We need to talk about the house," she said gently, folding her napkin with theatrical calm. "It's just, things are shifting. Callista's move, our finances." Callista jumped in. "It'd be easier if you just signed off, Yetta. No lawyers. Just family." I sipped my water and pulled out my phone, clicked the file I'd queued in notes. Hit play. Vera's voice filled the room. "We already fixed the paperwork. She'll either sign or get forced out." The fork in Callista's hand slipped, clinking against her glass. Vera's eyes widened. "You recorded me?" I didn't blink. "You called it a conversation. I called it a plan." The silence wasn't dramatic. It was surgical. Before anyone could recover, my phone buzzed again. A notification from Facebook. I tapped it open. My stomach didn't flip. My breath didn't hitch. It was just confirmation. A post from Nina, an old friend we both once shared. She had written, "We always knew who did the work behind the scenes. It's just sad to see the loud ones take credit." Attached was a photo, blurry from the birthday party. Me, setting up decorations while Callista posed in front of the cake. I held the phone up, turned it around, and laid it gently on the table like evidence in court. Callista scoffed. "You made this public?" I leaned back, voice steady. "You made me invisible. I just turned on the lights." Nobody reached for their wine. I pulled a manila envelope from my bag and slid it across the table. "Certified notice," I said. "Ownership dispute, filed this morning." Callista stood so fast her chair screeched. "You're doing this now? After everything this family has done for you?" I met her eyes. "You mean like deleting my name from the deed? Or throwing my gifts in the trash? Or cropping me out of every picture that didn't need a scapegoat?" Vera's voice trembled. This isn't how family works." I smiled, just slightly. "Exactly. This is how survival works." The next morning was quiet, in the way empty rooms are after a fight. I left the house before either of them woke, avoiding the kitchen like it might still echo with the last thing Vera said. I drove downtown with the windows cracked. Sacramento air in spring has this thinness to it. Still cool, but it carries every smell. Coffee shops opening, trees blooming, and asphalt that remembers yesterday's heat. I parked behind the building and took the side stairwell up to the co-work space I shared with 2 other women-owned small businesses. No one else had arrived yet. Perfect. Inside, I flipped on the overheads and dropped my bag by the window seat. The sun hadn't caught the glass yet. I powered up my laptop and reached for the folder marked Pending External Grants. That's when my phone rang. It was Jeff, one of our recurring community partners, someone who had always been respectful, collaborative. I picked up. "Hey, Yetta," he said. "Quick question. Was your sister looped in on your last proposal?" My pulse stuttered. "No. She's not part of the project." There was a pause. "She submitted a deck to the board, called herself your strategic advisor, claimed she co-founded the initiative." I didn't respond right away. "She had stats," he continued, "from your own impact reports, client metrics." Her tone was polished, but not informed. I asked him to email it. When it came through, I stared at the PDF like it might disappear. But there it was. My language, my vision, my results, repackaged with her name stamped in at every pivot. That afternoon, I met Nina for lunch, same booth we always shared at the diner on P Street. She could tell I wasn't hungry the moment I sat down. "They're not done yet," I said quietly, pushing my water glass in a slow circle. "Who?" she asked. "My family." She waited. I rarely said that word out loud. I told her about the grant, about the pitch, about the theft. Nina didn't flinch. She never did. Then I told her about something else. A memory. Not a new one, just one that had finally resurfaced. I was 12, Callista 15. It was the weekend of my school talent show, and I was set to perform a monologue I'd written myself. Vera had helped me memorize it. That morning, she told Callista, "Let your sister have the spotlight today." Callista had sulked, stayed upstairs until just before the show. When we pulled up to the school, she stepped out in a sequined dress and heels, borrowed lipstick shining. On the way in, Vera leaned close to her and said, "Don't shine too much, or Yetta will feel small. You know how sensitive she is." I remembered that line now, not as protection, but projection. Nina looked at me, brow furrowed. "They made you responsible for their comfort, and called it kindness." I nodded. Back at the office, I drafted the dispute. Formal language, referenced proposal ID numbers, stated that no external representation was authorized. That co-founder status was inaccurate. Before I hit send, I opened my voice recorder and pressed record. "This is Yetta Collins. Any statements, pitches, or presentations made in my name moving forward must be authorized by me directly. This serves as formal notice that all business-related matters are to be handled through this account or my legal counsel." I saved it, filed it with the rest. No rage, no name-calling, just fact, just clarity. They always thought I wouldn't fight because I was quiet. They forgot quiet is how you hear everything. I hit send on the email. Seconds later, a new one appeared. "Confirmation. Your notice has been received and logged. We have forwarded your statement to Ms. Callista Collins per request." I leaned back, took a breath, and whispered, "Let them explain why they needed me, now that I've removed myself." 2 nights later, I walked into the restaurant like I had a reservation with inevitability. It was one of those places with exposed brick walls and Edison bulbs, charming in a way that made everyone feel like they were part of something curated. A private room had been reserved for Callista's farewell dinner. Of course it had. I spotted Vera first, hovering near the bar with a glass of champagne and a smile too tight to be genuine. She waved me over like we were on the same team, as if the week's events hadn't happened. I nodded politely, but didn't approach. The room was already buzzing with people, Callista's friends, co-workers, a few extended family members I hadn't seen since the last time they congratulated me on having such a successful sister. She stood near the center, radiant in cream, all teeth and confidence. The crowd rotated around her like planets to her sun. I took a seat along the back wall. No name card, no welcome, no need. Callista raised a glass. "Thank you all for being here tonight. I couldn't leave without a proper goodbye. It's not just a job, it's a chapter. And this," she gestured to the room, to Vera, "this is the village that raised me." Applause. "And, of course, my sister Yetta," she added, with a practiced softness. "You've always been the grounded one, the constant. I wouldn't be here without your quiet strength." I didn't move. I didn't blink. Then, during the lull between salad and the main course, a man I didn't recognize leaned over to me. "So?" he said with a friendly smile. "Are you just staying at Callista's place until you find your own spot?" I turned to him slowly, keeping my voice even. "No, I co-own that house." He blinked, surprised. "Oh, sorry, I just assumed." I smiled. "You and everyone else." I excused myself before dessert, but I didn't leave. Instead, I stepped outside the room and reached into my bag. The manila envelope was still there, still sealed. I returned just as Callista was prepping her final toast. "Before you clap again," I said, my voice calm but cutting through the noise, "maybe let's hear from the part of the story that didn't get a cameo." Heads turned. I walked to the front, standing where the projector screen had been an hour ago. This house Callista keeps referencing, the one she claims launched her, it wasn't just hers, it was mine, bought with my credit, my income, my name, which someone conveniently removed without my consent. I opened the envelope and held up the deed. "This is what I signed. This is what they hid." Silence fell like dust. Callista laughed, short and brittle. It's complicated. No, I said, locking eyes with her. It was made complicated so I'd shut up. Vera stood, her mouth open, eyes wide. One guest whispered, "Wait, she co-owned the house?" I didn't stay to answer. I turned, walked out, and felt the air cool against my cheeks as I stepped into the hallway. A server passed by and paused, looking at me with a half smile. "They clapped for the wrong sister," he said under his breath. I kept walking. By the time I reached my car, my phone buzzed. Notification from a social media tag. Someone had filmed it. My short speech, the envelope, the gasps. The caption read, "The sister they forgot had receipts." I started the engine. By Sunday morning, the buzz had dulled to static. No calls, no texts, no one in the kitchen. I moved like a tenant in my own home. Quiet, deliberate, touching nothing I didn't need. The microwave clock read 7:14 when I reached for the coffee pot. It was cold. I didn't bother reheating. I wasn't expecting to hear anything, but the voice drifted in from the back hallway anyway. "Vera." On the phone. "Yes, we're leaving Tuesday morning, just the three of us. Don't worry, it'll be better this way." I didn't move. Didn't make a sound. Just stood by the sink, cup in hand, while the weight of that one sentence pressed its heels into my ribs. They were going on a trip. A family trip. And somehow, the person who paid the mortgage wasn't included. Vera never said a word to me about it. Not even a feigned invitation I could politely decline. She just made the plans and assumed I'd figure it out by absence. She wasn't wrong. I set the mug down, went upstairs, packed a tote bag with a notebook, a water bottle, and a lightweight cardigan. I grabbed my keys from the hook and left through the side door, unnoticed. The park wasn't far, just enough distance for the breeze to reset the day. I found a bench near the fountain, where families passed by in cheerful chaos. Dogs pulling leashes, children waving bubble wands, couples walking in sync without speaking. I watched them without envy, just a strange ache I couldn't place. Something between relief and resentment. Exclusion isn't silence. It's a statement. I pulled out my phone, opened the Notes app, and stared at the blank screen. Then I typed, "I'm not angry you excluded me. I'm angry I spent so long earning a seat at your table." I read it twice, deleted it. There was nothing left to explain. Hours passed without me realizing it. The sun had climbed and drifted again. Shadows stretched long on the sidewalk when I finally stood up, stretched, and walked back to the car. Home was still empty. Vera's car was gone. Callista's suitcase had moved from the hallway to the foyer. Ready to leave before I could say goodbye, I suppose. I opened the fridge. Half the leftovers were gone. The table was set with 3 plates and folded napkins, even though dinner wasn't for hours. I stared at the settings, then reached out and removed one chair. Dragged it across the hardwood, took it to the garage, and leaned it against the wall next to the boxes of holiday decor and resentment. Back inside, I wiped the empty space on the floor with my foot. That felt better. They call it peace when I'm not around. I call it finally seeing them clearly. Later that night, my phone buzzed once. A text from Vera. "We'll talk when we're back." I let it sit unread. Upstairs, the house felt lighter. I passed Callista's old room, still cluttered with the trophies she never dusted, the framed photo of her and Vera from a school banquet. I didn't pause. In my own room, I flicked on the lamp and saw it. The box, still wrapped in navy paper with silver ribbon. The gift from Ellie. Tucked behind the garage bins because Vera said it didn't match the setup. I sat down on the bed and reached for it. This time, I picked it up. I peeled back the ribbon slowly, not for drama, but for something quieter. Reverence, maybe. The paper slid away without resistance, and inside was a hardcover journal, handmade, bound in navy fabric with a single embossed line across the bottom corner. "Write what they didn't let you say." Taped to the inside cover was a note from Ellie, folded in half. "For the stories they'll never steal from you, start with the one you never told anyone. about how you kept showing up even when no one saved you a seat. I pressed my palm against the first page and exhaled. Downstairs, the air had shifted. I couldn't hear anything but the ticking wall clock and the occasional bird scratch across the rooftop. Monday had arrived quietly, a kind of peace that didn't ask permission. They were gone. I didn't check to see if they'd left a note. I didn't need to. In the office, I placed the journal beside the manila folder labeled Evidence Now. There was no contest between them, no weight, no hierarchy. One held proof, the other would hold perspective. My phone rang. The number blinked unknown, but something in me recognized it. I answered. "Yetta," came the voice. A little raspy, a little cautious. "It's May." A pause. "I saw the clip," she said. "You did what I couldn't." May, my aunt. The one they stopped inviting after she dared to question too loudly, to not show up in beige. She continued, "They called me dramatic. You? Dangerous. But really, we just stopped being obedient." I laughed. Not a full one, but enough to shake something loose in my chest. "Maybe that's what healing is," I said softly. "Learning how to disappoint the people who demanded your silence." We stayed on the line for a few minutes longer, not saying much, just existing. It was the most honest family interaction I'd had in years. After we hung up, I walked through the house slowly. I passed the hallway, where Callista's framed quote still hung, something about ambition and rising above. I took it down without ceremony, carried it to the closet. In its place, I hung a blank canvas. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I finally had room to decide what would go there. Back at my desk, I opened my laptop and began typing. A blog post, not a tell-all, not a revenge draft, just a quiet reckoning. The title, "Being Cut Out," was the start of cutting free. I didn't tag anyone, but I knew they'd see it. And this time, they wouldn't be able to rewrite it. Later that evening, I made a cup of coffee and stepped out onto the porch. The breeze had picked up, warm enough to remind me spring had roots, not just flowers. I sat down, pulled the journal onto my lap, and opened to the first page. No one watching, no one clapping, just me, and the story I was finally ready to write. This time, I wrote, "The story begins with me. Hi, I'm Seraphine. My half-sister sent me an invitation to a gala, fancy gold trim, handwritten insult on the back. She knew I cleaned hospital floors for a living. She wanted me there to humiliate me. What she didn't know? I came with a flash drive. And when I hit play, the room didn't just go quiet, it cracked. They laughed at me like I was entertainment, but they didn't know the cameras were rolling, and the will they buried had my name written in bold. Why was I erased from every photo, every story, every checkbook, until that night? Why did it take 20 years for my father's voice to be heard again, through me? Endings don't always arrive in anger. Sometimes they arrive sealed in envelopes and read aloud under a spotlight. Want to know what they heard when the whole room went silent? The sun had dipped just below the roofline by the time I made it home. I could still hear the sharp buzz of fluorescent lights flickering in the hallway outside my apartment. Cheaper bulbs that clicked when they got tired. After 10 hours cleaning ER floors, the rhythm of that flicker almost felt like a lullaby. Then I saw the envelope. It was wedged into the top crack of my doorframe, peeking out like a tongue-in-cheek smile. Ivory cardstock, gold trim, no return address. But I didn't need one. Only one family ever wrapped cruelty in elegance like that. I pulled it down slowly, walked inside, tossed my keys onto the chipped counter. The kitchen smelled faintly of floor wax and day-old coffee. Still wearing my scrubs, I stood under the single overhead light, opened the flap, and read, "You're invited to the Blythe Legacy Gala. Dress code, formal, bring only your best." No greeting, no signature, until I turned it over. "Don't forget your mop. Indira." I stared at those 6 words for longer than I'd admit. Not because they surprised me, but because they didn't. I didn't curse. I didn't laugh. I just stood there, letting the fluorescent bulb hum. She still thought I was someone who could be shamed into silence. 2 days later, I found an excuse to be near the estate. Paper delivery for legal counsel. Technically true. The courthouse was down the street, and I still had my old badge. I wasn't proud of the detour, but I wasn't exactly ashamed either. The moment I stepped inside the marble foyer of the Blythe estate, the chill hit me, not from the air conditioning, but from the past. Everything looked the same: polished columns, marble tiles, a chandelier so big it once scared me into silence as a child. But it was the painting that caught me this time. Hung above the main staircase, like a god watching over his kingdom, was the Blythe family portrait. I hadn't seen that canvas in 15 years. I didn't need to. I remembered it like a scar. Everyone stood posed. Henry, stiff in his charcoal suit. Indira, as always, front and center, her dress engineered for attention. Zinnia, just behind her, forever the accessory. And off to the side, a little girl in a blue dress, my shoulder, my arm, half of my head. That's all they left in. They had taken the time, the effort, to paint me out of a moment I had actually lived. "She still fits the frame, doesn't she?" A voice came from behind me, sugary and sharp. "Some things never belong, no matter how well you clean them." Indira. She sipped from her glass like this was just another Tuesday. Her lipstick hadn't moved, but her eyes scanned me like a stain she hadn't scrubbed out. I didn't respond. It wasn't the insult that hurt. It was the assumption that I wouldn't say anything, that I didn't even deserve a reaction. I turned back toward the exit. No drama, no scene, just one last glance at the painting. Somehow, it looked more honest now, with the missing face. She thought she could erase me. They all did. But erasing isn't forgetting, and silence doesn't mean surrender. They think silence means I've forgotten. They're wrong. By the time I left the estate that afternoon, the coastal air had cooled just enough to sting. My footsteps echoed too clearly on the stone path, and no one stopped me. Not the valet, not the concierge. It was like I had slipped back into the role they assigned me long ago. Present, but not counted. 2 days later, I returned, but under different circumstances. I wasn't in scrubs this time. Just plain slacks, a blouse, clipboard in hand. They were prepping the venue for the gala, and I used the phrase volunteer logistics more than once to wave off suspicion. No one cared. The reception desk had a mounted digital guest list, a sleek vertical screen that cycled names by alphabetical order. I scanned quickly, expecting not to see my name at all, but it was there, only not where it belonged. Vale, Seraphine, janitorial staff, non-VIP. Not guest, not even pending, just blunt, degrading classification. A woman behind the desk squinted at the screen, then looked at me with a rehearsed smile. "Are you sure you're not on the service team? Sometimes names get sorted by department." Behind her, 2 interns were sipping lattes, nudging each other. One of them muttered, "Guess they're letting the help preview the wine list now." I didn't blink. I didn't correct her. I smiled politely, calm, detached, and stepped aside like I was late for something that actually mattered. But inside, something curled tighter. It wasn't rage. It wasn't even hurt. It was colder than that, like the moment a burn stops stinging and goes numb. I wandered deeper into the venue, clipboard still in hand, until I found a side door with a taped sign, "AV Team Only." I entered without knocking. Inside, a few techs were setting up monitors, testing projectors. A man in cargo pants and headphones glanced up but didn't challenge me. I kept walking until I stood at the edge of a large screen. The opening promo was rolling, something they'd probably show at the start of the gala. Footage flashed by in stylized black and white. Henry shaking hands with congressmen, Indira posing beside donation plaques, kids in uniforms at a scholarship event. The music was cinematic. Then came the old family reels. There was the estate in summer, the dining room at Thanksgiving, Henry holding Indira as a toddler, her head on his shoulder. But no trace of my mother, no footage of me, not even the back of my head. It was like the entire history had been cleaned of us, scrubbed, bleached, sealed. I stayed in the shadows, watched every second, let it burn its way through me. The technician beside me chuckled, not realizing I was close enough to hear. Someone must have done a real clean job scrubbing the past. The other guy laughed. Indira doesn't leave fingerprints. I didn't move, didn't correct them, because I needed that reminder. They didn't erase me to protect a story. They erased me to own the story, and they were counting on me not to speak. But I didn't need to shout. Let them think I'm invisible. That only makes it easier to slip through the cracks. I didn't go straight home after slipping out of the AV room. I walked the long way, past rows of blooming hedges that lined the estate's west side. It was quiet there. No voices, no rehearsed laughter, no one to see the tears I didn't let fall. By the time I reached my apartment, the light outside had already begun to dim. I kicked off my shoes at the door and let the silence wrap around me. There was nothing in my fridge except a half-empty bottle of tonic and a couple of old apples. I ignored both. Instead, I knelt beside my bed. There was a box I hadn't opened in years. It lived under the frame, tucked behind extra linens and a forgotten suitcase. I pulled it out slowly, dust drifting up, as I set it on the floor. My hands didn't shake, but my heart had started its quiet thumping again, the kind you don't feel until it's louder than your thoughts. I opened the lid. Inside, wrapped in faded tissue and clear plastic, lay the dress. Black satin with silver beading along the collar. Still elegant, though softened by time. It was the same dress my mother wore to her first and last gala, the one Henry had invited her to as if she mattered. She'd worn it with quiet dignity and steel in her eyes. I was barely 7, but I remembered how she walked that night, like she knew the walls would close in, and she was going to memorize every moment before they did. After she died, the dress disappeared, sold off in a charity lot under the family's name. I found it 10 years later. It had been listed as vintage formal wear unknown origin, but I knew every stitch of that neckline. I bought it back. Not because I thought I'd ever wear it, but because I refused to let them have the last word. Now, sitting cross-legged on the carpet, I unfolded the dress and ran my fingers along the lining. I took out a small sewing kit and a piece of silk. It was time to make room for truth. I stitched a small inner pocket, just wide enough to hold a folded document. My mother's letter would go there. So would the printout of Indira's note, the kind of things that get lost when stories are retold by those with power. The thread pulled tight. I knotted the final seam, then stood up and laid the dress over my arm like I was heading somewhere sacred. But memories don't let you go without one last detour. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the closed window. My mind went back, years back, to Henry's funeral. I had arrived early, wearing a plain black coat and simple heels. The church was stone cold inside, the kind that echoed every movement. I had asked the coordinator about my name on the speaking list. She paused. "You must be mistaken," she'd said gently. "Only family is allowed remarks." Later, when Indira stood behind the podium, she spoke about legacy, about honor, about sacrifice. She didn't mention me. She didn't mention my mother. I remember the man in the pew behind me, leaning forward and whispering to someone, "Why is she even here? She's not one of them." That stuck with me longer than the eulogy. Grief has its own hierarchy. They made sure I stayed on the ground floor. But not this time. This time, I'll wear what they threw away, and let them see who they lost. I stepped back into the bathroom and held the dress against myself in the mirror. It still fit. Not because I hadn't changed, but because they never grew. Rain started just after I got home. Not the kind that comes with thunder and show, but the soft, persistent kind that soaks everything before you realize it's there. I watched it streak the window for a moment before kicking off my shoes and letting my bag slide off my shoulder onto the floor. The laptop screen still glowed from the kitchen counter. I hadn't bothered to close it earlier. I moved toward it absently, like muscle memory, meaning to shut it down for the night. That's when I saw it. A new email. From Blythe PR. Subject line, Final Notes, Private Draft. It was meant for Indira. I could tell by the salutation, but it came to me instead. I clicked. Attached was a PDF titled, How to Keep the Bastard Quiet. I didn't even blink. My body didn't flinch. But I felt it. Like acid, slowly eating from the inside. There was a strategy laid out. How to seat me, frame me, use me. Frame her presence as comic relief. Highlight the contrast in presentation. And then this. Her existence is the stain we've bleached for decades. Let her be the laugh of the night. I saved it. No panic, no scream. I simply moved it into a folder I had quietly labeled Insurance. Then I closed the laptop, and I sat at the table alone, the same chair where my mother used to braid my hair while humming gospel under her breath. The same table where I ate canned soup during shifts when the hospital ran out of staff. The same spot where I once waited for a man who never showed back up. That memory came uninvited. His name wasn't something I said often, even in my own head. I hadn't needed to. Some griefs don't need narration. He was kind. At least in the beginning. He used to call me bright, not pretty. He asked questions instead of offering opinions. For a while, he made me believe there were men who saw beyond bloodlines and family banners. Then, Henry died. And he disappeared. No goodbye, no closure. Just a silent vanishing act that left me questioning whether any of it was real. Tonight, curiosity, or maybe something crueler, pushed me to scroll through the gala's public sponsor list, one of those glossy PDFs filled with logos and donors and tiers of acknowledgement. And there he was, listed under platinum sponsors, right next to Indira's name. Apparently, he didn't vanish. He just changed alliances. Married her. It wasn't heartbreak, not anymore. That wound had scarred. But seeing it spelled out, his name beneath hers, still pulled something raw from a place I thought had healed. He once told me I made him feel like home. Now he was funding the woman who made a career out of turning me into a footnote. She didn't just steal my name, I whispered aloud, my voice hoarse even to myself. She took everything I gave my heart to and wore it like her own. I didn't cry. I stood, walked to the closet, pulled out the dress I had finished mending the night before, laid it across the bed. Then I sat back down and wrote a single line on the back of the printout from that email. I thought I had nothing left to lose. I was wrong, because I had one more silence to break. The printer at the library made a soft churning sound as the last page fed out. I stood there a moment longer than I needed to, watching the stack settle in the tray. Clean, centered, final. The legal documents were for backup, but in my bones, I knew they were more than that. They were a small, quiet insurance policy. The morning air still had a bite to it as I stepped outside. Not cold, but sharp. It felt like the kind of air that dared you to flinch. I didn't. I tucked the pages into my shoulder bag and walked past the front desk, nodding to the librarian, who was sorting books near the returns cart. She looked up, stopped. Then her face softened in a way I hadn't seen in years. Seraphine Vale, she said, shaking her head gently. Still the best reader in the poetry section. You haven't changed a bit. I blinked, then smiled, slow and honest. Leora? She stepped out from behind the cart, wiping her hands on her sweater. God, it's been forever. We stood there for a beat, not saying much. That was the thing about real people. You didn't need to fill the silence to make it meaningful. Her mother used to cook in the Blythe kitchen. That made us unofficial sisters once, back when we were too young to understand the lines between staff and family. Are you? She gestured at the papers. Just tying up some things, I said. She nodded like she understood more than I was saying. Then she leaned in a little and lowered her voice. Whatever they say tonight, Seraphine, they don't own your story. The words landed hard. I wanted to say thank you, or maybe cry, but instead I just nodded, squeezed her hand once, and walked out. The light had shifted by the time I reached home. Sun broke through the clouds in patches, bouncing off the window frame. I didn't sit down right away. Instead, I reached for the top shelf of the coat closet, pulled down the small satin pouch I hadn't touched in years. It had always been there, just behind the gloves I never wore, and a photo album I couldn't open without swallowing old hurt. Inside the pouch was a letter. The paper had yellowed and the corners were soft, but I knew every curve of the handwriting. My mother's voice came back with each line. Don't let them teach you shame for what you are. One day, your silence will be the thing they fear. I held the letter against my chest. Then I carefully unfolded a new sheet of stationery and copied her words by hand, line by line, curl by curl, onto clean paper. It felt like breathing after being underwater. When I finished, I folded it neatly and slid it into the pocket I had sewn into the inside of the black gown, right next to the email printout. They'd tried to erase my mother's name. They'd ignored her death, her voice, her daughter. But she gave me one last thing. Not survival. Permission. To be angry. To take up space. To say, I was here. I mattered. A soft breeze moved through the balcony door I had cracked open earlier. I stood there a while, watching the sky turn the kind of blue that only shows up after rain. Then I reached into the bottom drawer of my dresser, pulled out the library name tag I hadn't seen since I was 17. It still had my name on it. My real name. Not the one they tried to flatten or hide. They measured me by silence. Tonight, I'll make them hear every inch they missed. The hum of air conditioning hit me as I stepped into the ballroom, sharp, dry, and too cold for a spring evening. The kind of chill that didn't come from weather, but from wealth pretending it had nothing to hide. Every eye didn't turn toward me right away. Not at first, but the murmur did. That low ripple of breath and recognition when a room smells scandal before it's served. The dress fit like memory. My hair was pinned high, just like Mama wore hers, when she needed people to look her in the eye and remember she wasn't a maid. I walked slow, straight-backed. I didn't smile. A few guests looked confused, unsure where to place me. Others grinned too wide, waiting for the punchline they assumed would come. Then, Indira stepped to the mic. Tonight, before we begin the main event, let's have a little fun. She smiled that practiced smile, the one that never touched her eyes. We call this our Legacy Light moment, a game of sorts. Simple rules, who can clean up fastest? The crowd chuckled. A pair of staff members wheeled out a mop, a bucket, gloves, and an apron. Bright white, sparkling like some kind of sick joke. Laughter broke out louder this time. I didn't move. My hands rested at my sides. My heart didn't race. I felt nothing that showed. One of the guests leaned to his wife and said, not quietly enough, "Guess the entertainment's already dressed for it." Indira never looked at me directly. She didn't have to. The MC gave a half-hearted laugh and clapped once. "Any volunteers?" Someone shouted, "Let her do it!" and pointed toward me. The spotlight followed. I didn't step forward. I didn't leave. I stood perfectly still, letting that light settle on me like a dare. Then a crackle came through the speakers. It wasn't planned. It wasn't part of the show. Indira's voice, low and clipped, carried over the system, some hot mic backstage feeding into the wrong channel. 500 says she walks out before dessert. A beat. Then another voice, her friend's. She's still got the janitor hands. Can't fake that. A wave of silence swept the room. Not respectful silence, but the stunned kind. Like a car crash people pretend not to stare at while watching every second. I turned. Slowly. Faced the camera by the stage, streaming this gala leave to the estate's private donor circle. And I smiled. Because I knew. They thought this was the climax. The part where I'd break. But this was just the overture. She won't last 5 minutes. Indira's voice added faintly from the speakers. She never did. Someone in the crowd said under their breath, "Is this still part of the show?" I whispered to myself, just loud enough for my own ears. They think this is the part I break. It's actually the part I start. The mop stood center stage, absurdly polished. The gloves sat waiting. But I didn't touch any of it. I turned my back to the spotlight, and the room followed me. If they wanted a show, I'd give them one, just not the one they rehearsed. I walked slowly from the spotlight, letting the hush settle behind me like a curtain. People whispered. A few shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but no one stopped me. I made my way toward the AV booth, where the lighting techs and production crew huddled over control panels and coffee cups. I approached one of the younger techs, nervous, twitchy, but harmless. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my voice low. "I need to use the restroom. Can I pass through the corridor behind the screen?" He nodded, already distracted by a flickering monitor. I stepped behind the velvet curtain that masked the tech area, the click of my heels softened by the carpet. Once I reached the console where they queued up the gala segments, I pulled the USB from my clutch. "Hey," I said, "I was told this was the updated version of the donor reel. Can you cue it up?" He blinked, looked at the drive, then shrugged. "Sure. We're on the charity slideshow now. This'll run next." I nodded, smiled politely, and walked back out into the crowd, calm like a glassy lake right before a stone breaks the surface. The screens at the front of the ballroom faded to black. The slideshow ended. A beat. Then the first frame flickered on. Not the gala logo, not the donor tribute. It was a hallway camera feed. The audio kicked in. Indira's voice, clipped and careless. "Just make her presence laughable. This is the legacy she deserves." Silence hit like thunder. A few guests chuckled reflexively, confused. A woman in pearls gasped. Someone near the center muttered, "Wait, is this live?" No one answered. The video cut again. Now it was a static screen with a title, "Internal Memo, March 12th. Then audio only. Laughter, then more voices. Indira again. "I'm telling you, she'll walk in, feel beneath everything, and crumble. People like her don't survive long in the light." Whispers erupted like sparks across the room. I didn't flinch. I didn't speak. I just let the room boil in its own reaction. Then, from the back of the ballroom, a figure began to move. A man in a dark suit, shoulders broad, posture upright. Older. His steps were measured, but certain. Darius Vale. He had been a guard at the estate for 30 years. Retired quietly after Henry passed. No one ever asked why. He approached the stage without invitation, walked to the podium with something in hand, a folder worn at the edges. "I was there," he said, voice calm but steady, "when Henry signed the document naming Seraphine his daughter. I witnessed it, and I made a copy." He laid the folder on the podium and opened it. "This is a scan of the affidavit, notarized and dated. Henry said, word for word, 'Don't let them bury her like they buried her mother.' He died 3 weeks later." Indira stood frozen at the edge of the ballroom, her fingers clenched around a champagne flute. She didn't move. Her lips parted slightly, as if she might object, but nothing came out. I stayed where I was, across the room, my hands at my sides, my heart beating slow and deliberate. She had spent years rewriting the story. All I had to do was press play. The screen now displayed my full name. Bold. Clear. The crowd no longer whispered. They watched. And for once, the reflection in her eyes didn't belong to her. This wasn't the finale. It was only intermission. The screen faded to black, and for a breath, the room sat in total stillness. No clink of forks, no murmur of polite disapproval, just that thick pause when every mouth forgets its next move. Then a different voice emerged. Not mine. Not the video technician's. It was Indira's. Only this time, it wasn't edited. It wasn't polished for public relations. It was raw, live, unaware. She was always the mistake, Henry just couldn't pull out fast enough. There was no music, no buffer, no soft fade. Her words landed like glass, dropped in a church aisle. Gasps, audible, immediate. Several heads turned toward her. A woman at table 3 stood and walked out without a word. A man near the dessert buffet stared at his half-raised spoon, then lowered it slowly, like even sugar couldn't coat this. I didn't look at Indira. I watched the guests. They were the ones I needed to see this. Not for me, but for the story they'd bought into for years. Someone whispered, "She said that? In her own voice?" The blinking red light on a phone in the back confirmed what I already hoped. It was being streamed. Not just to the donors in the next room or the foundation's partners, but beyond that, people with influence, with memory, with consequences. Indira stepped forward, her heels clicking against the stage like gunshots. She reached the microphone but didn't speak right away. Instead, her eyes scanned the room, landing briefly on her husband, Zinnia. He didn't stand, didn't defend her. In fact, he left the head table without touching his wine and took a seat in the back, face unreadable. Indira gripped the podium. "That was—" she started, then stopped. Her voice trembled, just enough for those who were looking for a crack. I watched as she turned to a staffer behind the curtain and hissed, "Cut the feed! Shut it down! Now!" But the damage was already done. Someone in the crowd said loudly, "She did this to her own sister? In front of all of us?" The air changed. That polite indifference people wear at galas peeled away, replaced by something closer to outrage, or embarrassment, for not having seen it sooner. And me? I still hadn't moved. My hands remained at my sides. I wasn't trembling. I wasn't smiling either. I didn't need to. I didn't raise my voice, I thought. I just let her lower hers loud enough for the whole world to hear. Indira tried once more to speak, but the buzz of voices swallowed her. No one was listening anymore. Not to her. She stood alone in the spotlight, her power not stripped from her, but exposed as hollow, flimsy, reactionary. And suddenly, all those years of silence didn't feel like silence at all. They felt like patience, purpose, proof. You don't have to shout to make the whole room silent. You just have to stop them pretending. They didn't lower the lights, but the energy dimmed anyway. Guests shifted uneasily in their seats, some whispering to their neighbors, others staring at the screen like it might still betray more secrets. I took that moment, the lull between outrage and understanding, to step toward the tribute table. It was tucked off to the right side of the ballroom, near the glass doors that led out to the lounge. Dozens of white lilies arranged in tall vases, each one tagged with a donor name or foundation label. But at the center was a single bouquet wrapped in black ribbon, arranged in honor of Henry Blythe. And beneath that bouquet, where few would think to look, was an envelope. I pulled it gently, the ribbon slipping loose like it had been waiting. A few guests near me noticed the movement. I held the envelope without ceremony and turned to the nearest staff member working sound. "Can you give this to the MC? Ask him to read it out loud, no edits." The man hesitated just long enough to catch the tension in my eyes. Then he nodded. Minutes later, the MC cleared his throat, now visibly rattled. "This is a letter from the late Mr. Henry Blythe," he began, scanning the page. "It was found in the family archives and appears to be addressed directly to one person." The room stilled again. The MC's voice, now steadier. To the one daughter no one had the courage to acknowledge. Gasps, audible and collective. The words that followed weren't poetic. Henry wasn't a man of softness, but he was a man of calculated truth. "I failed you. I let others tell me you were better left out of sight, that your mother's name would ruin the family image. I knew better, but I allowed it. I believed protecting the family name meant discarding yours. And for that, I offer no excuse, only this." I watched Indira from the corner of my eye, her hands now clenched at her sides. The MC continued, voice firmer. "You are my daughter. my blood. And should this letter ever come to light, it is my intent that you be recognized as such. Her name is Seraphine Vale. You will respect it. Someone clapped. It started quiet, unsure, but it spread. 3, 4, then more. Not applause, not celebration. Recognition. I didn't move. I didn't need to. And then came the second blow. The security team appeared from the lounge corridor, one of them holding a laptop, the screen tilted toward the front stage. A hush fell again, tighter this time. Darius stood with them, hands behind his back, nodding once toward the MC. "This was recorded 3 weeks ago," said the tech beside him. "Security footage, estate library." The screen flickered. There was Indira, sitting at Henry's old desk, whispering to a lawyer I recognized. Her voice was clipped, urgent. "No, we don't include her. We redact that paragraph. If it ends up in probate, it slows everything. She's not part of the public story. You make it disappear." The room didn't gasp this time. It exhaled. Like an entire ballroom releasing a lie it didn't know it had swallowed. The lawyer beside me leaned into the mic, calm as ice. "This is grounds for a full probate review. We'll be requesting a freeze on all distributions until the will and supporting documents are verified." Indira didn't speak. Couldn't. I looked at her fully for the first time that night. "You tried to delete me," I said, not loud, but clear. But even the cameras remembered. And for once, every eye in that room turned to me. Not to watch me fall, but to see how I'd stayed standing. The air had thinned, not from heat or exhaustion, but from what had just happened. A shift that everyone felt, even if they couldn't name it. The ballroom, once pulsing with clinking glasses and social maneuvering, now felt like it had been emptied of oxygen. People stood in clusters. Some hovered by the doors, not ready to leave, not sure if they were still part of the story unfolding. I moved through them quietly, the hem of my mother's dress brushing the marble floor like a whisper behind each step. We were ushered into the side lounge, where a smaller group, mostly legal observers, board members, and close family, had been invited to hear the estate attorney speak. The man in charge was calm, deliberate, a type that chose his words like each syllable might be notarized. He removed a sealed envelope from a black briefcase and laid it on the polished wood table. "This document," he said, "has been in our care since 3 weeks prior to Mr. Henry Blythe's death." No one said a word. He broke the seal. Slowly, methodically. Inside was the original will. The real one. He held it up for us to see. No grand gestures, no dramatics. Just the truth, finally being read in its full form. "In Clause 7, he began, "Mr. Blythe wrote, 'My daughter, Seraphine Vale, is entitled to 50% of all non-liquid family assets. This is not charity, this is correction.'" A murmur swept the room, but it didn't grow. People knew better now. I didn't smile. I barely breathed, but something in my chest softened, like a tight fist unclenching after years of trying to hold itself together. Across from me, Indira stared at the document like it had been written in a language she didn't speak. She didn't argue. She didn't flinch. She just froze. That's when the court liaison entered, quiet, sharp-suited, flanked by another clerk with a file in hand. "Ms. Blythe," the liaison said, offering a folded paper. "Pending investigation into will tampering and suppression of testamentary intent, the estate is hereby frozen under temporary injunction." Indira took the paper. Her hands shook as she unfolded it. Zinnia, still near the door, watched. Then, without a word, he pulled his phone from his jacket, typed something quickly, and slipped out the side exit. The attorney looked around the room, gaze steady. "This document predates all others," he said. "The probate court will now decide the formal course of division." I nodded once. Quietly. They didn't need me to say anything else. The law had finally spoken in a way they couldn't mute. I thought of every time I had walked past a family portrait where my face had been trimmed from the frame, of every empty seat at events where my name had been deliberately excluded, of every forced silence that wasn't meekness but calculation. For years, I had no voice in their story. Tonight, the law wrote a new ending for me, and the ink was permanent. Justice doesn't shout, it signs papers. The lounge had emptied by the time I stepped outside. The sky was beginning to soften, just enough for that sliver of pink light to break past the clouds and spill through the stained glass windows above the patio. It cast long shadows across the stone floor, coloring everything with the kind of quiet that only comes after reckoning. I didn't feel triumphant. Not exactly. I felt precise, like everything had finally landed where it was always meant to. That's when I saw her. Avon Carlyle. She stood near the garden entrance, one hand resting on the carved stone ledge, her eyes scanning the horizon as if she was waiting for a verdict only she could feel. Her presence had always carried weight, even in silence. She turned when she saw me. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes had softened. "I knew you existed," she said. No preamble, no apology yet, just the truth at last. I didn't speak because I thought silence was diplomacy. I waited. Let her finish it. I was wrong. She took my hand. It wasn't a dramatic gesture. No squeezing, no trembling. Just pressure. Enough to feel real. "I can't undo what I enabled," she said, "but I can amplify what you've started." For the first time that night, I let the tension in my shoulders drop. Not because I needed her forgiveness, but because she offered something better. Alignment. Inside, the staff had started clearing glassware. Someone moved quietly around the tables, gathering linen napkins and folded place cards. I turned toward the exit, but a voice behind me stopped me cold. "Seraphine?" "Indira." I didn't look back at first, just listened. Her tone was different, less sharp, more human. "You've made your point," she said, "but do you have to burn it all down?" I turned slowly, met her eyes. There was no venom in my voice, just truth. "You didn't leave me enough to burn." I stepped closer. "You just never expected I'd light my own fire." She didn't speak. Tears clung to her lashes, mascara painting her cheekbones like smudged armor finally cracking. And for a moment, she looked like a woman who knew the war was over, and she had lost something she couldn't name. "I wasn't trying to ruin you," she whispered. "I was trying to hold on to what I thought was mine." "That was your mistake," I said gently. "You believed the family name belonged to you. It belonged to all of us, even the ones you tried to forget." She collapsed into the chair behind her, the strength gone from her knees. I stayed standing. There was a time I might have knelt beside her, placed a hand on her shoulder, said something soft to bridge the gap. But not anymore. Regret is real, but so is the damage. And you don't get both justice and denial. The sun caught the edge of a wine glass near the railing, refracting light like stained glass on a church floor. Avon stood again beside me, her hand resting lightly on my back. "What we choose to remain silent about," she murmured, "we are guilty of twice." I nodded once, then turned and walked toward the exit, the weight of that night no longer on my chest. She thought I needed her forgiveness, but I had already forgiven myself for ever needing her approval. 2 days later, the courthouse steps were lined with press. Cameras flashed even when nothing moved. Microphones pointed toward empty air, waiting for someone to give them something new to chew on. I stood off to the side, beneath an old elm tree that had probably been here longer than most of the buildings around it. The leaves above rustled just enough to remind me I wasn't inside anymore. Not in their rooms, not under their ceilings. Indira exited the building first. Her hair was pulled back, tighter than usual. Her face wore something close to stillness, but not quite peace. Her daughter walked beside her, clutching a small purse and wearing the kind of shoes little girls hate, but mothers insist on for court appearances. And then, just before they reached the steps, The girl tugged at Indira's arm and asked, not with malice, not with drama, just curiosity. Why wasn't Auntie ever in the family pictures? Time stopped. Indira froze. Every reporter within 10 feet heard it. So did I. The microphones tilted in her direction. But she said nothing. I didn't expect her to. I walked slowly past them, staying clear of the crowd. The girl noticed me, her eyes wide but not afraid. Children don't carry history in their gaze, just questions. I nodded at her and smiled. Not too much. Just enough to let her know I heard her. Later that afternoon, I stood behind a folding table at a modest press event near the park. No stage, no velvet ropes, just folding chairs, a few curious onlookers, and a podium that looked borrowed from a high school debate team. I know there's been speculation about lawsuits, about money, about revenge, I said. Let me be clear. This was never about destroying the family. It was about rebuilding what they tried to leave buried. A hand went up. A reporter in a tan jacket, notebook in one hand, phone in the other. Do you feel you've won? I thought about it. Took a breath. No, I said. I don't feel like I won. I feel like I remembered who I am loud enough that no one can forget again. Another reporter leaned forward. Will you ever speak with your sister again? I paused, looked up at the open sky, then said, some questions don't need answers right away. Some need time to grow roots. And that was enough. I left the press to their deadlines and walked home. Alone, but not lonely. When I got in, I opened the mail. One envelope stood out, plain white, with no return address. I opened it slowly. Inside was a single page. Dear Ms. Vale, we are pleased to inform you that your proposal for the Community Justice and Restoration Project has been approved. Funding will begin July 1st. I stared at the letter for a long time. Not because I didn't believe it, but because it reminded me that justice doesn't end with a courtroom. Sometimes it begins with what you build after. I folded the paper, placed it beside the library tag from my teenage years, and slid them both into the drawer, where I kept things I never wanted to forget again. There would be no family photo to commemorate the moment, no dramatic reunion, no cinematic ending with violins. Just me, still standing, and a silence that finally belonged to me. My story didn't end when they tried to erase it. It began when I stopped waiting for them to write me in. Hello, my name's Lavenna, and on Christmas Eve, my husband handed me divorce papers in front of his entire family, just like they'd planned. They all watched, waiting for me to cry. But I didn't, because I had a folder in my purse, with his signature, a prenup he drunkenly signed months ago. He lost 70% of everything. What they didn't know was that I was pregnant, and that the woman they underestimated had been preparing this moment for nearly a year. They thought they were ending something, but what if this was only the beginning? They seated me at the end of the table again, right next to the kitchen door, where the steam and clatter of serving trays replaced actual conversation. No name card for me. Everyone else had theirs in delicate calligraphy. Mine? Just a folded napkin that someone half-heartedly pushed aside to make room. It wasn't a mistake. It never is. I smiled the way women do when they've already cataloged every slight and filed it away. My hands rested politely in my lap, even though I could feel my fingers curling into my dress. The linen felt stiff. I had ironed it that morning, knowing full well no one would notice. They never did. Isolde was at the head, of course. Perfect posture, pearls. She looked like a woman who'd never been interrupted a day in her life. Quentin sat beside her, laughing with his uncle about market trends like he didn't know I was 10 feet away. Which, emotionally, I wasn't even that close. The turkey was still warm when Sable, my sister-in-law, raised her wine glass and let out a laugh. You all remember the story, right? How Mom didn't even want Lavenna at first? How she told Quentin she hoped he'd find someone less complicated? She looked right at me, eyes dancing with faux innocence. But look, you wore her down. Laughter around the table, warm, familial. Quentin chuckled too, swirling his wine like he couldn't hear the sound of my spine stiffening. Not a soul said, "That's not true." Not a single damn one. I smiled again. It was quieter this time, less teeth. The kind of smile you wear when you realize the room you're in was never meant to include you. Not fully. I reached for my glass of water and took a slow sip, using the movement to avoid making eye contact with anyone. The air suddenly felt too thick. No one corrected the story, not even my husband. That silence, it told me more than any words ever could. I remember the first time they invited me to this house. I brought dessert. From scratch. Peach cobbler. Isolde said, "We're more of an apple pie family," then threw it out the next morning. I told myself she was just being traditional, not cruel. Years passed, patterns formed, family weddings where I wasn't asked to speak, baby showers where I sat on the edge, taking photos instead of being in them, dinners where I cleared the plates and never heard a thank you. Always the helper, never the daughter, certainly not the equal. I used to think endurance was strength, that if I stayed quiet long enough, they'd let me in. I clung to that idea like a raft in a storm. Now I wasn't so sure. Quentin's father leaned in across the table to toast his son's latest business deal. I watched him beam, watched Quentin take all the pride in the world without ever looking my way. I wasn't a partner in that success. I was scenery. After dessert, as I helped clear the plates, of course it was me, Sable brushed past and whispered, "You're lucky, you know. Most women wouldn't survive Quentin." I paused, tilted my head just enough to acknowledge her, and I smiled one last time. But this one? It didn't touch my eyes. It didn't try to. Survival was never the goal. Not for me. I don't plan to survive him. I plan to outlive him. That thought, the one about outliving Quentin, didn't just bloom at the dinner table. It had been growing quietly, like a root under concrete, since the day I lay alone in a hospital bed, the walls too white, the air too clean, and the silence deafening. 6 months ago. Late spring. The bleeding started on a Wednesday morning, just before sunrise. At first, it was a dull ache, like cramps. Nothing unusual. I didn't panic. I made tea. I paced the hallway, pressing my palms into my lower back. Then the pain changed. Sharp, deep, wrong. I called Quentin. Voicemail. I texted him. Then again. And again. I called Isolde. No answer. I even tried Sable. Silence. I remember curling up on the bathroom floor, still wearing my robe, phone clutched in one hand, my other trembling over my abdomen. I whispered, "Please, not this." And then the towels were soaked, the floor smeared, and I was in my car, hands shaking on the steering wheel, driving myself to the ER while biting my lip so hard it split. They checked me in. Efficient. Cold. The nurse asked if someone would be joining me. I just shook my head. By the time the doctor confirmed it, I already knew. "There's no heartbeat," he said. His voice was soft, but the words hit like cement. I stayed there for 19 hours. 19. They brought food I didn't touch. The nurse changed the bedding twice. My phone never lit up, not once. The doctor came in near midnight to say I could go home. He asked again if anyone was coming. I told him I preferred to leave alone. That was a lie. I walked myself out. The air outside was thick with summer rain. I didn't cry. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I was too empty to produce tears. Something inside me had snapped shut. Back at the house, it was dark. Quentin had texted once, just once, hours earlier. "Golf tourney ran late. Everything okay?" I didn't reply. I showered. I burned the towel I bled on. I crawled into bed and stared at the ceiling, waiting for the sun. Weeks passed. We didn't speak about it. He never asked how the appointment went. Isolde sent a lemon tart 2 days later with a note. "Hope you're feeling better soon." No mention of anything real. That was their way. Pretend the wreckage was just spilled wine. The only acknowledgement I ever gave the loss came in the form of ink. That night, I pulled out my journal. A plain black notebook. No quotes on the cover, just pages waiting to hold what no one else would. I flipped to a fresh page, wrote the date, drew two symbols, an X for what was gone, a small padlock for what I wouldn't forget. That was the night I stopped waiting to be saved. I started mapping exits instead. Sometime in early December, I climbed into Quentin's SUV to grab a few of my documents from the glove box. While rifling through, I spotted something in the back seat. A gold-wrapped box. Square. Still perfect. I knew immediately what it was. The Christmas gift I gave Sable last year. A monogrammed leather organizer I'd had personalized, still sealed. I didn't get angry. I didn't cry. I placed it back where it had been, like a museum piece on a shelf labeled Unopened Love. Back in the house, I made tea and sat in silence. No TV, no music. Just me and the quiet. I reached for my phone. There was a voicemail from Maris, my sister. We hadn't spoken in months. "Call me when you're ready," she said. "I'm not like them." I didn't delete it. Didn't return the call either. But I saved the message. Maybe I wasn't ready to hear it. But I was done being available to the people who only noticed I was missing when it was convenient to blame me for leaving. The phone sat beside my tea, screen dark again. I didn't press play on Maris's message. I didn't need to. Her voice had already threaded itself into the darker corners of my mind, curled up next to all the other things I wasn't ready to deal with, but couldn't quite abandon either. The kind of things you don't bury, just store. I sat there a while longer, watching steam rise in lazy spirals from my mug, trying to feel something sharp, shock, anger, grief. But everything was muted. I was underwater. I was floating. The next morning, I opened the shared laptop, Quentin's laptop, the one he swore he only used for his fantasy football leagues and managing our taxes, an ironic mix of escapism and obligation. I told myself I wasn't snooping. Not really. I needed a copy of the hospital invoice from my last ER visit. Insurance was asking questions. That was the official reason. But I lingered. The screen lit up. Messages synced automatically from his phone to the desktop. I hadn't even realized it did that. Maybe he didn't either. Or maybe he did. Maybe he wanted me to find it. One message blinked, a text thread. Him to Nate. "She'll cry, just watch. It'll be the perfect scene." My hands didn't tremble. My heart didn't lurch. There was no cinematic gasp or shattering sound effect. My stomach didn't flip. It calcified, hardened into something cold and compact, something that wasn't going to pass anytime soon. For a half second, I gave myself the grace of doubt. Maybe he meant something else. A movie scene, maybe. A prank they were planning for someone else. Some obscure joke between old college friends. But deep down, I knew better. The timing, the phrasing, it all lined up. Christmas dinner. His entire family gathered under one roof. Isolde and her curated place settings. Sable's self-satisfied smirk. The cranberry sauce shaped like a can still on the table. He wasn't planning a holiday. He was directing a performance. And I was cast as the weeping wife. I took a screenshot, then another, just in case. I emailed both copies to myself, labeled the subject Documentation. Then I created a folder titled Receipts 2023 and backed it all up. When I closed the laptop, I wiped the counter clean with a damp cloth, like none of it had ever happened. I didn't confront him. Not then. 3 days passed. Enough time to host a few fake smiles, finish wrapping the last of the gifts, and pretend I didn't flinch every time he brushed past me in the hallway. That's when Isolde showed up. Unannounced, as always. I was on the floor in the laundry room, sorting socks and debating whether bleach would fix a wine-stained blouse. She walked in like she owned the place, a white garment bag slung over her arm like an offering. "I had this tailored for you," she said, like she was doing me some grand favor. "For Christmas dinner, I thought something softer. You've had a rough year." She unzipped the bag. Inside was a beige dress, high neckline, dropped waist, minimalist to the point of being monastic. The fabric was so light it looked nearly translucent under the overhead light, like it could vanish if I breathed too hard. "It's forgiving," she added, placing the emphasis just so. I held it up, forced to smile. "It's lovely," I said, but in my head, I was already placing it somewhere between costume and shroud. That night, I didn't try it on. I hung it at the edge of my closet like an artifact waiting to be interpreted. Then I sat down in front of the mirror, brushing my hair back and studying the woman who looked back at me. Pale, controlled, efficiently invisible. A few days later, I caught a conversation while passing the dining room. Quentin was seated with Isolde and Sable. A printed guest list fanned out on the table between them like blueprints. "She'll be stunned," he said, "but she won't fight. She's grateful just to be here." Laughter followed. Light, effortless, certain. He saw me walk by. He didn't stop. That was when something inside me, something quiet and long dormant, sat up. I stood in the hallway mirror for longer than I ever had before, studying every detail, the soft blouse, the neutral tones, the way I'd trained myself to nod slightly, tuck my chin just enough, adjust my posture so I never took up too much space. Appeasement by design. My body had been edited for years, not to be beautiful, just to be acceptable. I wasn't ashamed, I was taking inventory. That night, I opened my notebook and drew 3 columns: what they see, what I show, what I'm building. Under what they see, I wrote, submissive, quiet, weak. Under what I show, I wrote, smiles, compliance, gratitude. Under what I'm building, I paused. I didn't write anything, not yet. That column needed evidence, not speculation, not ink. The next morning, I took the beige dress off the hanger, pulled it over my head. It slid down my frame like an apology. I turned to the mirror, examining the silhouette. Soft, non-threatening, decorative. The kind of woman you could humiliate at dinner and still get praised for your restraint. I tilted my head, blinked slowly, practiced the expression they all expected. "They think I'll cry," I whispered to my reflection. "They think I'll crumble." But they didn't know. I'd stopped waiting to be rescued a long time ago, and I wasn't the one walking into a scene. I was the one writing it. I didn't need to slam a door or tear up a dress to know a shift had started. The silence had become less like surrender and more like strategy. A quiet before the storm. Mine, not theirs. Late Thursday afternoon, I was in the home office sorting through a clutter of tax folders. Quentin had asked me to tidy things up for the accountant. I didn't argue. I nodded, opened the drawer, and started flipping through files. Paperwork had become my armor. Numbers didn't lie, even when people did. That's when I saw the tab. Post-division planning. The manila folder was pristine. Inside, balance sheets, property reallocation, and account transition notes. None of them had my name on them, not once. Every form said, Primary, Quentin Harper. Every field under secondary was left blank. And then an email printout was clipped to the back. From Quentin, subject, strategy in case she pushes, sent to Isolde, body. A clean detachment before she suspects. She won't fight, she never has. I read it twice. Not because I didn't understand it the first time, but because my hands wouldn't stop shaking. They were untying me from the picture quietly, methodically. No raised voices. No late-night ultimatums. Just deletion by omission. No signature. No confrontation. Just erasure. The next morning, I had a prenatal appointment at the clinic downtown. The nurse was young, maybe in her 20s, and cheerful in that way that feels rehearsed. She asked me to confirm my emergency contact. "It says Isolde Harper," she said, tapping her tablet. My stomach turned, but my face didn't. "It should be my sister Maris," I said. She frowned. "We had a patient update form submitted, a few weeks ago, signed by your husband." I smiled. "Let's fix that." After the checkup, I didn't drive home. I sat in the car for a while, then walked into the administrative office, filled out every form myself, submitted a notarized letter, and added two-step authorization to my file. Control wasn't something I'd ever had in that house. But this was my body, my child, my name, and I was reclaiming them piece by piece. By the time I got back home, the air had changed. Maybe just for me, but it was enough. I stood in the hallway and looked at the mantel above the fireplace. The family photo from last Christmas still hung there. Everyone smiling, my image blurred, slightly off-center, like I'd moved at the last second. They never replaced it. No one mentioned it. They probably didn't even notice. But I did. And it stayed with me as I walked to the living room, opened my laptop, and deleted the shared calendar I had once used to track birthdays, anniversaries, family dinners, the things they all claimed I forgot. I signed up for a P.O. box that evening, printed a new copy of all my medical records, and backed them up to a private cloud. One folder labeled, Leaving. That night, I stared at my phone. Maris. I hadn't replied in weeks. I typed out a text. I think it's time, then paused, deleted it, typed again. Are you free next Tuesday? I sent it. As I set the phone down, I whispered to myself, they think they've deleted me, but I've been copying everything. The text was sent, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't stare at the screen waiting for a reply. I set the phone face down on the coffee table, lit the lamp beside the couch, and pulled the throw blanket over my legs. There was nothing remarkable about that night, except the stillness, the kind of stillness that follows clarity. Later, when the house had settled and Quentin's car pulled into the driveway, I walked into the guest bedroom, opened the closet, and found the small lavender candle tucked inside an old shoebox. He hated that scent, said it made the house smell like a grandma's parlor. I never argued, I just stopped lighting it until that night, until I sat on the floor, legs crossed like a child in story time, and lit the candle with the same lighter he kept hidden behind his bourbon. The flame flickered. I whispered, not to the candle, but to something in me I'd been ignoring for months. If this stays lit until morning, I'll keep the baby. Then I leaned back against the wall and let the quiet press in. It did stay lit. By dawn, my eyes burned. But I wasn't tired. I wasn't anything except resolved. I opened my notebook, flipped to the back, and wrote one word: stay. The following evening, Quentin invited me to his company's holiday gala. You'll want to look nice, he said. It's all the partners this year. Big faces, real money. Don't embarrass me. I looked up from my tea and said, I'll wear what I want. He raised an eyebrow but didn't push, probably because he assumed I'd fall in line, just like I always had. Saturday came. I wore a navy dress I bought on clearance, paired with a soft gray coat I'd splurged on last fall. No beige, no pastel, no approval. When we arrived at the hotel ballroom, I noticed how quickly he walked ahead, how he didn't glance back to check if I was behind him. I stayed 2 steps behind, smiling politely to strangers, letting the buzz of expensive perfume and practiced laughter wash over me. Halfway through the evening, as the CEO passed by, I reached gently for Quentin's arm. A simple gesture, reassuring, steadying. He flinched, not physically, but in that way a man does when he wants to shake you without making a scene. Then he laughed and said, loud enough for 3 people nearby to hear, She gets clingy sometimes. Holidays, right? Laughter. Not mine. I stood still, hand frozen midair. I dropped it to my side, found a glass of water from a nearby table, and took a sip. No one noticed. Not really, but I did. He just called me desperate, in public, again. On the drive home, the silence in the car was heavy, but not new. The kind of silence that settles after a fight that never actually happened. I turned to him. Calm, not angry, not even cold. Keep underestimating me, I said, voice level. See how that works out for you. He scoffed, eyes still on the road. I'm not scared of your little threats. I turned away from him and looked out the window. You should be. When we got home, I didn't slam a door. I didn't even speak. Instead, I lit the lavender candle again. It flared instantly. I watched it for a moment, then pulled a sticky note from the desk drawer and wrote, "He laughed." I didn't. I stuck it on the inside cover of my notebook. That was the last time I reached for him. The last time I reached out at all. From then on, I would reach in. I didn't write anything else in the notebook that night. I didn't need to. The warning had already been issued, quiet, sharp, and unshakable. I closed the cover, blew out the candle, and slept better than I had in weeks. The next morning, a Saturday, I slipped on jeans and an old sweatshirt, pulled my hair into a knot, and drove into town. There was a lawyer's office on the edge of downtown Asheville, tucked between a florist and an old insurance firm. It belonged to Milas Freeman. Maris had given me her name months ago, just in case. At the time, I had filed it under the mental drawer marked, "Not yet, now was yet." I walked in without an appointment. The receptionist looked surprised, but didn't stop me. Maybe it was something in my face. Maybe it was the manila envelope in my hand. Milas looked up from her desk when I entered. She was younger than I expected. No-nonsense posture, silver hair cropped tight. No smile, just a curious raise of the brow. "I'm Lavina Harper," I said. "I think my sister called you a while back." "She did," Milas replied, folding her hands. "Have a seat." I opened the envelope. Inside was a napkin, folded carefully, preserved like a document worth more than its weight. Quentin had signed it at a friend's engagement party back in September. He was drunk, red-faced, slurring, riding high off closing a sale. I'd made a joke about protecting my book money, a short story I'd sold to a literary journal for $600. He grabbed a pen from the bartender, scribbled something resembling a prenup on the back of a cocktail napkin, then tossed it in my lap and said, "There, now you feel safe?" I kept it. I never told him. Milas read it, twice. Then she looked up. "This is valid." I nodded. "With this, we can build an ironclad amendment," she said. "And if he files first, we win first." That was all I needed to hear. The next 3 days were a blur of scanned documents, notarized pages, and digital backups. I watched my name reappear in line items where it had once been erased: home equity, investment accounts, vehicle titles. Not as a favor, as a right. Milas worked fast, efficient. She didn't pity me. She didn't coddle. She respected the paperwork. By the end of Tuesday, I had a file folder in my desk drawer, one in a locked box in the laundry room, and a USB drive hidden in a tampon box under the bathroom sink. My phone held encrypted copies, and Maris had a full set stored in her cloud. That night, Quentin asked if I'd seen a confirmation email from our financial advisor. "It was in the shared folder," he said, digging into his stir-fry. I shrugged. "I haven't checked." Truth was, he'd deleted the whole folder the day before. He thought I hadn't noticed. He thought the prenup was a joke, but the joke had a signature and a date, and I wasn't laughing. When he started changing passwords and redirecting access to our brokerage accounts, I let him. Let him think he'd cut me off. Let him believe he was 5 steps ahead. What he didn't know was that I'd mirrored the entire drive 3 weeks prior, before he even started acting suspicious. Paranoia makes people sloppy. Entitlement makes them blind. Wednesday morning, Milas emailed the finalized amendment. Legally binding, enforceable under his own wording. She called a few hours later. "He thought he was mocking you," she said, "but he signed a knife." I leaned against the kitchen counter, staring at the framed photo on the fridge, Quentin and me in Charleston, back when pretending was easier. I'd hated that trip. He hadn't let me pick a restaurant, said I was indecisive, said he had to plan everything or I'd freak out. I remembered that photo because it was the only one from the trip where I didn't look like I wanted to disappear. He gave me the blade. I just had to wait for the right table to set it on. By the time I zipped up the pale dress and slipped my hand into the clutch, the sky outside had turned a soft gray, just enough light left to see your own breath. The house was already filled with the smells of rosemary, baked ham, and too many scented candles trying to cover the scent of control. I moved through the rooms like a ghost with a to-do list, refilling wine, adjusting a crooked napkin, helping Isolde fold linen place cards that spelled everyone's name correctly. Everyone's but mine, of course. Mine was scribbled with a dull pen on the back of a seating chart, taped to the bottom of the tablecloth. I left it there. They thought I didn't notice, but I always noticed. The house looked like something out of a home magazine. Pine garlands strung across the staircase, gold ribbon wrapped around every door handle, a roaring fireplace flickering under the mantel where our blurred family photo still hung. I carried the final platter of appetizers to the long dining table and set it down beside the crystal salad bowl. 17 seats, 17 name cards, one empty space they hoped would swallow me whole. The buzz of conversation was low but constant. Quentin's voice carried above the rest. Loud, confident, as always. Sable giggled too hard at something he said. Isolde stood by the drinks cart, nodding at every guest like she was hosting the White House holiday dinner. I wasn't a guest. I wasn't a wife. I was the anticipation of failure. They dressed me for a funeral and forgot I was the one with the eulogy. Idalia moved quietly beside me. She didn't say much during family events, knew better than to offer opinions. But she paused while clearing empty glasses and leaned close enough for her breath to brush my cheek. "Kitchen's quiet," she murmured. "Come with me for a second." I followed. The hallway seemed longer than usual. When we reached the pantry door, she didn't open it. Instead, she slipped a folded paper from her apron and pressed it into my hand. No explanation. On the bottom corner, in her small, neat handwriting, just in case. I opened it when I reached the hallway bathroom. It was a printed transfer authorization, signed by Quentin. The one he swore didn't exist anymore. Dated, stamped, legal. My fingers didn't shake. My breath didn't hitch. I folded it back up and slid it into my clutch. It was time. I walked past the living room, past Isolde whispering to her cousin about managing expectations, past Sable reapplying lipstick at the hallway mirror, past Quentin standing by the fireplace like he was preparing a speech. In the guest room, I opened the bottom drawer of the small side table. Inside was everything Milas had prepared. A sealed copy of the prenup, the amended terms, and one slim white envelope. I tapped it once against the edge of the drawer before placing all of it into my clutch. I stood in front of the mirror. The dress hung off me like permission. Permission to disappear, to defer, to let them decide who I was. But my eyes didn't belong to a woman who was disappearing. I straightened my shoulders, reapplied the lipstick I liked, not the shade Isolde had gifted me, and walked back toward the table. They were all seated now. Quentin saw me approaching and smiled like he'd won something. Like this was the final act in a play he had written. He didn't know I had rewritten the ending. They dressed me for a funeral and forgot I was the one with the eulogy. The clinking of silverware had slowed, and the buzz of conversation dipped just enough for everyone to hear Quentin tap the side of his wine glass. 3 clear notes, like the beginning of a speech no one asked for but everyone expected. He stood with a practiced smile, holding a white envelope between his fingers like it was a wedding toast. The lights above the table cast a golden glow on his blazer, on the crystal, on the faces lined up around the table, each one tense with something between curiosity and complicity. "Before dessert," he said, looking directly at me, "a little something for my lovely wife." He handed me the envelope with the flair of a man delivering a gift that wasn't really a gift. His fingers brushed mine. His eyes sparkled. The room went silent, and I could feel the weight, like they were holding their breath, waiting for me to cry, to run, to plead. I opened it slowly. Divorce papers, already signed and dated by him. I let my eyes skim the lines. I didn't need to read every word. I'd seen this tactic coming. Quentin was the kind of man who bet on outcomes, and he'd bet on mine. I lifted my head, met his gaze. Then I signed. My hand didn't shake, My pen didn't pause. When I looked up, Quentin laughed under his breath. "That's it?" he asked. I capped the pen. "That's it!" The silence that followed cracked slightly. A few relatives exchanged quick looks, unsure if they should feel relieved or disappointed. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a small, neatly wrapped leather folder. I placed it beside Quentin's wineglass with care. "Your turn." He hesitated, then opened it. For a man so composed, he unraveled fast. It was the prenup, updated, notarized, legally airtight. The very napkin he'd once drunkenly signed had bloomed into an amendment that transferred 70% of our shared assets to me. His handwriting was on every clause. His ignorance made it binding. Milas had ensured there wasn't a single loophole he could slide through. I watched him flip through the pages, his face losing color with every line. From across the table, someone whispered, "Wait, is that real?" Sable's fork hit her plate with a clink. Isolde's lips pressed into a tight line, her hand clutching her napkin like it might stop the bleeding. Quentin looked up, his voice dry. "You tricked me." I tilted my head. "No." "You handed me the pen." I reached into the clutch again and pulled out a smaller envelope, one he hadn't seen. I placed it gently beside the folder. "And this," I said, "is for everyone else." He opened it, slid out a black and white image. A sonogram. 8 weeks, I said, my voice low but steady. "You didn't just lose your wife tonight. You lost your child, and 70% of everything else." He didn't speak, couldn't. His jaw tightened. His hands trembled, barely holding the photo. Around the table, no one said a word. The candles flickered, suddenly too loud in the quiet. I looked at Isolde, who had gone pale, then at Sable, who was now staring down at her untouched wine. No one moved to comfort him. No one reached for me. And that was fine. I didn't need them. Later that night, after the guests had awkwardly shuffled out and Quentin locked himself in the downstairs study, I stood in the hallway near the fireplace. The family portrait still hung there. The one where I was half cut from the frame, like I'd leaned too far out, or someone had cropped it that way on purpose. I took it down. In its place, I hung a new frame, a photo of the sonogram, centered perfectly. Beneath it, a brass plate I'd had made the week before. One word, engraved with quiet certainty. Visible. I didn't burn the house down. I just took away the mask and let the wind do the rest. By morning, the garlands were still strung neatly along the banister. The porch lights blinked softly in the gray light, like they hadn't heard the news. The kitchen smelled faintly of pine and cinnamon. Everything looked the same. Nothing was. Quentin was gone. Not in theory. Not just angry or sleeping it off. Truly gone. His keys no longer hung on the small iron hook beside the door. The one we'd always joked was too cottagecore for a house like this. The hall closet, once packed with coats and scarves, and the faint smell of his cologne, now held only my things. Jackets still zipped, hangers politely spaced. The guest room door was ajar, loose at the hinge, swinging slightly from the draft. Hours earlier, he'd slammed it shut with enough force to rattle the frame. Now it just hung there, like an apology. There was no note, no dramatic final word or flurry of accusations. Just absence, clean and complete. I padded barefoot into the kitchen, the tile floor cool against my heels. The stillness didn't feel ominous the way it once had. It felt earned. I filled the kettle, measured out the grounds, waited for the first sigh of boiling water. For the first time in months, I didn't brace when the cabinet door creaked. I didn't pause to listen for footsteps, for the rustle of Quentin moving behind me, for the sharp clearing of his throat to mark his disapproval. He was gone. I poured the coffee, stirred in cream, leaned back against the counter, and took a long sip. I didn't feel triumphant. There was no cinematic swell of music, no sense of winning. I hadn't destroyed him. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't clawed or cursed. But I had survived it. Quietly, on my terms. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. Around mid-morning, my phone buzzed. Maris. Her voice greeted me without preamble. I saw Mom's face, she said, when you handed her those papers. She didn't even blink at first, just stared like someone had pulled the floor out from under her. I haven't seen her speechless since 2004. I didn't answer, just let the silence hum between us as I sipped my coffee, the corner of my mouth tugging up into a crooked smile. She messaged me after the party, Maris continued, said you were disrespectful. I told her maybe she should have paid attention to you before you became a legal document. This time I chuckled. Not bitter, not spiteful, just tired. Tired in the way that comes after holding your breath too long, but also lighter, like something had finally unlatched. By noon, a package arrived at the door. No knock, no signature required. Just a plain cardboard box with my name on it, addressed in Isolde's narrow handwriting. Inside, my old sweaters, still faintly smelling of clove, a stack of cookbooks I'd left in the kitchen, a half-used candle, and a sticky note slapped to the inner lid. No hard feelings. I tossed the box in the recycling bin without opening the books. Later that week, I went in for my routine OB checkup, a small act that had begun to feel monumental. The nurse greeted me with a gentle smile and handed me a folded printout of updated medical records. Would you like to hear the heartbeat today? She asked. I nodded, wordlessly. Lay back, breathe deep. The sound came softly, steadily, like someone knocking from the inside. A reminder, a signal, a small but persistent echo of hope. I didn't cry. I just closed my eyes and breathed it in, like it was the first clean air I'd had in months, maybe years. Back at home, I began repainting the guest room. I chose a soft sage green, something that felt alive but grounded. The same walls that once felt like borrowed space now belonged to me. I opened the windows wide and let the mountain air sweep through the room. In that light, even the floor seemed to exhale. Above the spot where the crib would go, I hung a small square frame. Inside, a print in simple script. You are wanted. It was a phrase I hadn't believed for a long time. Not fully. But now I needed to believe it. For them. And for me. The following week, I updated my will, set new emergency contacts. Bookmarking freelance jobs on my laptop became a daily ritual. Small steps, each one carving out a bit more room for myself. The bills still came, of course. The silence still echoed down the hallways. But it didn't scare me anymore. The quiet wasn't a void. It was space. And that space was mine now. A few days later, a bouquet arrived. Peonies, soft and wild in their bloom. No sender, no message, just a small white card nestled among the stems. Took me too long to see it. I'm sorry. Could have been from Quentin. Could have been from Sable. Could have been from someone I hadn't thought about in years. But I didn't waste time speculating. I placed them on the kitchen table, admired the color, let the gesture stand without dissecting it. An apology doesn't always need acceptance. Sometimes it just needs to exist. And that's enough. That night, I stood in the nursery. The room glowed soft from a lamp in the corner. One wall now held 3 frames. The first, a photo of Maurice and me at 12. Muddy, laughing, triumphant, after conquering a creek bank behind our childhood home. The second, a sonogram image, fuzzy and gray, and impossibly profound. The third frame hung empty, intentionally so. Not because I lacked a photo, but because it wasn't meant for a picture. It was meant for whatever came next. A placeholder for the future, for the version of me I hadn't fully met yet. A reminder that not every part of healing has to be filled in right away. Some wounds don't close. They stretch. They warp. They leave space. And in that space, something new can grow. And I'm still here, still standing, still mine.